Iron. We all get caught out by it every now and then. There's no shame in digging a little bit of iron, but if you're digging too much iron, you're probably doing something wrong. Join me in the Skill School for some iron identification tips. Tip number 1. It's easier to identify iron if you can hear it. So my top tip here is, if you're using basic 1, turn on the iron volume. Turn it up to about 3. If you're using no iron volume, there's no iron tone, so you may not know a target's iron. Let me demonstrate. It's a little bit choppy, but a lot of people would dig that, thinking that was a good target. See, there's no iron tone to it at all. Now if we turn the iron volume back on, now listen to it. It's introduced the iron tone and given us that extra piece of information. Top tip number 2. Headphones. I see a lot of people using aftermarket headphones, and to be honest, they're the ones who are having trouble identifying iron. For some reason, aftermarket headphones sound very, very dull on the dais, and there's no life to them. It's always a good idea to stick with genuine XP headphones, and then you can get the full dais experience, including the tonal identification. Tip number 3. As you're above a target and you keep swinging your coil, it may sound good, but if you slowly draw the coil back, you'll then may hear an iron buzz coming through, which, if it's strong, is a very good indication of that target is iron. Misshaped iron is very, very difficult to identify, and this is one good tip. Just draw the coil back. If the good target starts turning to iron, it's more than likely misshaped iron. Once again, you can make that sound half decent. Come off of the target and it's a strong iron buzz. Tip number 4. Signal intensity. A lot of big iron will give a signal, but it's different to something like, say, a coin. It's more of a Morse code, a digital type signal, and you can always tell it as you go over it. It's very, very intense. Let me demonstrate. You can hear how this signal is very strong, it's very digital, almost like Morse code. And as you come off of it, it changes. Very, very strong. A typical iron signature. Tip number 5. The bubblegum signal. When you're out detecting, have you ever had a target that just holds onto the coil and doesn't let go? It seems really, really wide. This is what I call the bubblegum signal, and that's a good indication of big iron. Let me show you. Really, really digital. And can you hear it kind of holds onto the coil? It's stretched, it's a little bit more stretched. There's the iron, almost like it's twice as wide as a coin signal. We call this a bubblegum signal because it kind of holds onto the coil. Top tip number 6, audio response. Some people run the audio response very, very high, 6 or 7 perhaps, and they think they're getting more depth, but all they're doing is making the iron intensity the same as the target intensity. So a coin may sound like a big piece of iron. They can't tell the difference, so it's always a good idea to run your audio response between 3 and 4, so you get a nice softer sound on a coin and a loud harsh sound on iron. Top tip number 7, coil height. If you get a target you suspect is iron, why not raise the coil half a metre off the ground, and as you're wiggling it, see how the target diminishes. If it's still strong, there's a good chance it's iron. Not always, it may be a big non-ferrous target, so don't take this as gospel, but normally big iron will give you a signal when you raise the coil off the ground. Tip number 8, the shape of iron. You need to be aware that some iron just simply can't be rejected and it can't be identified. You're going to dig it no matter what you do. Round iron, ploughshares, horseshoes, stuff like that, really big chunks which are a strange shape, these are all going to catch the detector out. If you've got a field full of this type of iron, you're in trouble. There's nothing you can really do. But please don't turn up the discrimination, because you just won't reject that type of iron using discrimination. Tip number 9. Soil conditions. If you're detecting on ploughed soil, the soil's broken up regularly and the iron doesn't have a chance to leach out its contents into the soil. So iron will be easier to identify on land that's been turned over regularly. Now if you're searching pasture and it's wet, the iron's been in the ground undisturbed for hundreds of years perhaps, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult to identify deep iron. So just be aware, your site conditions can be the difference between identifying iron and not identifying iron. Tip number 10, power. If you're running your machine with a high sensitivity, you're going to dig more misshaped or deep iron. It's a fact of life. So don't be frightened to turn your sensitivity down if there's a lot of iron in the area. And also, if you're using the black coils, the TX gain is really important. The factory preset on the TX gain is 2. Some people run it at 3. Personally, I think all that does is drain the battery quicker and just make the machine unstable. If you're on a site which has got lots and lots of misshaped iron, don't be frightened to turn the TX gain down from 2 to 1. And you can do this by going into sensitivity, expert, TX gain. You may note the white coils do not have a TX gain feature. This is not a problem, it just means they work differently. And that's my 10 top tips for identifying iron. Do you know what? Let's give you another one, the XY screen. Go into configuration, profile, hit the plus button or the minus button to bring up the XY screen. It's a brilliant way of identifying iron. A series of lines for good targets and squiggles for bad targets. It really does help identifying iron. Well, that's my top 11 tips for identifying iron. I'm sure there's lots more tips out there which I've forgotten and you'll pick up as you progress. I hope it's been of use. But remember, some iron isn't bad. Sometimes you want to dig iron because there's some really cool iron artefacts out there. It's not just rubbish. For example, fibulas. Some fibulas are made out of iron and these are lovely finds, and we don't find them because we spend too much time concentrating on ignoring iron. So from time to time, if you're on the right site, it's always a good idea to dig a little bit of iron. Well, there you go. That's the end of my video. Thanks for watching, if indeed you still are. And we'll see you on the field again soon.